I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational, in particular regards to deconversion issues, atheist issues, and those issues in relationship to the Bible and theology. If you are a person who has deconverted, I want you to understand you can consider this to be your home if you wish to do so. A safe place, if you will, for which to express some of your concerns about deconversion. Today is a Friday video, so I am basically addressing the comments given to me from the channel. And I'm going back to the video I did right here, the Tall Tale of Jesus. I basically have done a couple of videos this week, and we got some comments, and Freebird of Reason is my biggest commenter as usual, but there's one other one that I want to deal with, but I'm going to deal with Freebirds real quickly here, because most of it is some of the interesting thought processes that we find ourselves in. But in the My Tall Tale of Jesus interlude, Oral Tradition, the Synoptic Problem, he says, very interesting, believing in the right way if someone believes in Jesus. What a strange key to enter the kingdom of God most denominations of Christianity believe. And within these denominations, all their different views, all convinced they're right and all others are wrong. If the Bible was the way to bring the salvation or the message, it has caused confusion. Surely this fact is proof that an all-knowing God can't be the author by inspiration, or is the author of confusion a point contradiction. Confusing authorship sounds like a lot of persuasion needs to be used, which is exactly what we see around the world. Thanks again. It's a funny old world. That's one of the big things about Christianity and other religion and deconversion issues. One of the things that happens, I think, is that you see people with their mentality going, oh, okay, this must be the truth. And the problem with all the denominations, the various factions and sects and infighting, is the Bible very clearly says that God is not the author of confusion. And so it seems to me that if the Bible was a true force for truth, there wouldn't be all this confusion. It would be much more clear what we should believe. I spent the greater part of my ministry as a theologian trying to reconcile certain aspects of the Bible. And because of that, I spent a lot of time, the more you consider the Bible and trying to reconcile all of its problems, the more you have to change your view. I never had the same truth, because, we talk about how we move on from one truth. And I'm not saying that, regular people don't do this too with other things. What I'm saying is, if the Bible is the indeed author of the truth, and this contains the truth about God, it seems like it would be a little, such an important thing would be very, very much more clear and much more, in your face as to what was going on. So there's kind of that aspect of it as well. And then I talked about my deconversion, cut and paste Christians, future plans, last week's video. Thanks for time for going through these thoughts. Have a good day. Thank you, Freebird. As always, you have some really good comments. Bible contradiction just a couple of days ago I released. It says, religion seems to work on a conspiracy, some truth, as we have layers in the rocks of the flood. We have found a chariot, so the sea was divided. Conspiracies of all types has people convinced maybe that there's some just patterns and persuasion. Yeah, you talk about persuasion a couple of times in the comments. The one thing about Christianity that I found interesting, if it was so true, why do you need preachers? Wouldn't it be evident right in front of everybody that you do need in my opinion, a lot of persuasion to persuade various people to religious truth. That said, religion does check off a lot of boxes for people, so it's easy to persuade them. Our survival instinct has grown to the point where somebody telling us that we can survive death is a powerful persuasive tool. Our desire for community, our desire for tribalism, to have an in and out group. These are all things that have led to our survival as a species, but it also has its inherent problems. And it's easy for religion to tap into that. It doesn't take long. I mean, and, of course, as somebody who studied political science, I also look at it and say, it's very easy to persuade people for the same reasons to follow one political party or another, to follow one political ideology or another. And so, it's had its survival aspects, but it's also had its non-survival aspects. So once again, outstanding. A couple of comments there, Freebird. Now I'm going to get to this other comment that's very short. The commenter is, 1-1, whatever that means. So I don't know who this person is or whatever, but the comment is very interesting. And this is on my Bible Contradictions of Bible versus Archaeology that I did a couple days ago. He says, "You just made up a story that the boat stank. If you want... I think you want it not to be true. Your video just shows you making stories the same way." Okay. When I talk about the Red Sea story, this was an archaeological find that took place in 1993. Here's the thing. Yes, I was engaged in speculation that a boat sank. I did not say that that was the explanation or the story. But archaeology is much more of an exact science. This isn't Indiana Jones stuff. Okay, this is looking at an artifact and saying, okay, what can we deduce about this? Now, I didn't make up a story so much as offer up a plausible explanation. There's several others, like maybe a ship was floundering and it was carrying chariots and it pushed them overboard so it didn't sink, so that they had a better chance to increase their buoyancy so that it didn't sink. So on and so forth. The thing about this speculation is I actually happen to do two things. One, we know that the Red Sea was used for trade, has been for millennia, still is. So it's plausible that ships were over on top of it. I don't need much in the way of magic either, like the story of the Red Sea does. You have to come up with an explanation of how God parted the sea from a magical point of view, and you have to use the idea of magic. I know a lot of Christians don't like the term magic when I use it there, but sorry, I've studied the nature of how people who believe in magic use magic. And the parting of the Red Sea is alteration magic, no matter how hard you want it to be something else. And that's something they don't want. Well, when God does it, it's not really magic. Special pleading doesn't work here. Regardless of which being does it, or how it's accomplished, it's still magic. Okay, so we sit down with our two explanations, or three. Let's use three here. And that way I can simply say this is about plausibility. What story is more plausible? Okay, the chariot, we find a chariot on the bottom of the sea. Okay, what are the explanations of how it got there? This is a perfectly rational archaeological question to ask. How did this artifact get here? Okay, so your explanation is, this is a chariot left over from the army of Egyptians that tried to cross the Red Sea when the waters were divided by Moses and God. Okay, well, you have a lot of more things to prove there than my explanations, possible plausible explanations of, a boat was there and sank and it had a cargo of, I'm not claiming it's an Egyptian chariot. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just saying, there's a boat that could have sank. There's a boat that could have been floundering in rough seas, so they tossed the chariot overboard. Maybe the chariot was lashed to the deck and the lashings came unloose and it rolled off and it wasn't an intentional thing. My point is this. I don't need magic as part of my explanation. I also have plenty of observable events and facts and data talking about buoyancy. I have observable things, that if you put heavy objects that are weighted down with iron or whatever and throw them into the water, they tend to sink. I have a lot of things that make my story very plausible. It's also a simpler story, which I am allowed then to use Occam's razor to say that the simpler explanation is for more likely. I didn't say it is true, but it's more likely to be true. I'm not making up stories. We all engage in speculation on how things happened. The question of proving whether their explanation, which explanation is true, is a little bit different because I have a lot less steps. You have to prove a lot of historical context too. You have to prove that this is indeed an Egyptian chariot. You have to prove that it belonged to said Pharaoh that followed the Israelites. You have to prove that the Israelites existed, which, by the way, despite our many, 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 many years of digging up Egyptian artifacts in Egypt, there is still, and they kept very good records, there is still no mention of any group that the Egyptians had dealing with that would indicate a group of slaves that they held that somehow escaped through plagues. There's no mention of the plagues, and they would have mentioned these things in relationship to their gods, and they don't. So there's a complete absence, is what I'm saying, in any of the Egyptian records of anything related to the Israelites, which is really weird. And because of the nature of the story, you would think that there was something there. My point is, you have to prove a lot more things to prove that's at the bottom. And so which makes which stories more plausible? Well, I think, the more naturalistic explanations, whichever one you pick, is far more plausible. You don't need magic. I don't have to prove any historical context. I don't have to prove any of that stuff. I just have to prove the basic physics of a chariot being on a boat that somehow found its way to the bottom of the ocean. We have aircraft, that are in pristine condition from World War II at the bottom of the ocean because they fell off a ship. This is perfectly plausible. I'm not saying it is the thing that happened, but I am saying it's a far better, more plausible explanation than whatever, magical tale, because, your statement, I think you don't want it to be true. I was a Christian for 40 years. I wanted all these stories to be true. I just couldn't. The evidence is overwhelming that they're not. Okay. What I want to be true and what you want to be true is irrelevant, okay, to the discussion of truth. It's what we can prove. What can we prove to be true? And you have a lot more. In order to prove the Red Sea story, you have to prove a lot more things than I do. I actually can go to the real world and, make a mock-up of a chariot, make a mock-up of an ancient ship, float it across the Red Sea, simulate a storm, simulate whatever, and get the same results with the chariot at the bottom of the sea, or a multitude of chariots if it was, a bigger shipment. You, on the other hand, if you want to believe the Red Sea story, have to prove the existence of God. You have to prove the existence of magic. You have to prove the historical context of the Israelites, Moses, and whatever Pharaoh chased them across the Red Sea. There's a whole packle of things that you have to prove that are fantastical, that have no real world correlation, and you haven't provided any evidence for that. So you have a lot more way to go. Perhaps you want the story to be true, despite the evidence to the contrary. And so want and desire is irrelevant. It's what we can prove and what is more likely to be proven as well. My video shows me making up stories the same way. I'm not making up stories. Sorry, I'm offering plausible explanations, and I'm not saying any one of them is the way that it happened. I'm simply offering a plausible explanation. As far as some of the rest of the things I talked about in archaeology, I'm not making up stories there. Once again, I referred you to a lot of videos where these people have taken the time to do the research and offer up the sources. The purpose of this channel is more about a discussion channel of these issues rather than, I consider it kind of my more controlled podcast, I guess you might say. And with a podcast, you don't always have the research at your fingertips, so you have to kind of look it up sometimes on the fly, but I don't do that. I use these Fly Day videos to do that after the fact. So I'm not making up stories. What I'm saying is that there are plausible explanations of what these things happen or how they could have happened, or that don't require miracles, that don't require magic, that don't require God. You don't have to have God as an explanation to every gap of knowledge. There are other plausible explanations of why this could be so. Just because you want to throw God into that gap or miracles into that gap, it's a God of the gaps argument. It's an argument from ignorance, and it's illogical, and it's a logical fallacy. You have to prove. It doesn't matter what you think is true or what you desire to be true. You have to prove truth. And religion, every time it tries to prove truth of some fantastical claim that it has, it fails every time. And every time science addresses a question, we usually get a far better naturalistic explanation, and it happens to conform with reality and is repeatable. That's the real thing about magic, isn't it? It's strange how it's never repeatable, how things don't work that way. I mean, even in the story of the Exodus, you have the Egyptian magicians copying Moses. So obviously they knew something that didn't have to do with God, that involved magic, that allowed them to do some of their sorceries. So, if the stories of magic are true, then they would be repeatable by magicians, and they could be testable and observable. James Randi died recently, but his foundation still goes forward with this $1 million prize. If you can offer up empirical evidence of a supernatural phenomenon, they'll give you $1 million. He has never paid the prize since its inception, and I doubt that the foundation will pay that prize into the future. That seems like an easy proof. Just, take your power, ability, supernatural phenomenon that you've observed and put it in a testable, repeatable situation and see if you can prove that it exists. Otherwise, as many people have pointed out, if you can't offer up proof of what you're saying, you're just talking out your ass. And, at that point, I'm not being insulting. I'm just saying that a lot of people, I'm guilty of it too, where I would make statements that I couldn't prove or didn't really know that were true. But once again, truth is irrelevant compared to my desires. What I desire to be true and what you desire to be true is irrelevant to the facts or the evidence that can be provided or hypotheses that are more testable. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, whether I want the stories to be true is irrelevant. And for 40 years, I did believe the stories were true. So, my desires have changed. Simply, it's not so much my desires have changed. It's just I've taken my viewpoints, looked at reality, and realized that a lot of my viewpoints didn't conform with reality, nor did they have predictable results. They were made-up stories that were made up by ancient peoples a long time ago to explain the reality that are no longer necessary because we've explained a lot of that reality, and it just has been found not to be true. That's the comments for this week. I do appreciate all my commenters, including the last one, because it offers a good exercise in why I no longer believe this stuff. So I do thank you for the comments. And, once again, when I address these comments, I'm not trying to be belligerent. My point is that you have to look at life a little bit more realistically. I think we all want, fairy tales to be true at some time in our life. But sooner or later, you got to deal with the realities of life. And since becoming an atheist, I have a far more realistic view of the world. Now, it doesn't mean I don't like fantastical stories. I'm going to tell you, the story of the Exodus is a pretty cool story if you take it as fiction. That took some imagination at the time it was written. Just amazing, powerful story. Anybody who's watched, the Ten Commandments, and, I'm sure that today the special effects will be even more awesome. It's an awesome scene. It's just as realistically as Harry Potter scenes. It's as realistic as, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. There's no difference to me anymore. The only difference is I don't know who the author is of the Red Sea story. It's a fantastical, nice thing, but there's just no historical or archaeological evidence to back it up. And that lack of evidence kind of indicates to me it's a made-up story. It's not that I don't want it to be true. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that there's no evidence that backs up the story, and there's no plausible explanation. And simply put, these chariots have another plausible explanation. There. Now, I'm going to finish the video at this point now, in truth. No real announcements other than I'm going to continue to try on this third shift schedule to continue to put out some videos every week. So thank you once again for your patience. And once again, I hope that someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.